Now, 2 weeks ago, Easter, we started with this series, and as you can see, we're calling it RIP, which a lot of people associate with death when you see the RIP and you think rest in peace, and even have the graphic there of Jesus finishing his rest and moving on. That first week, we talked about Jesus' purpose, him knowing why he came and why he was here, what his point of coming to earth was. He was plenty busy, had plenty to do, had purpose before he came here. And then he came anyway. If it hadn't occurred to you before, that probably could have accomplished what he needed to do without coming here. But he did it so that we would have an example, so we could look to him, so that in large part, many of us would be able to trust him in a deeper way because he came here and because he went through everything that we have to go through. Hey, Brian, could this be just a little bit cooler, please? Thanks. So we talked about Jesus' purpose that first week. The last week we talked about finding your purpose, that everybody has their own individual purpose, and there's great value in recognizing the reason that Jesus died for you so that you could have life, and that he calls you to a purpose. And so discovering your purpose can be an act of worship. This week, it seemed appropriate to also talk about reminding ourselves that those around us also have purpose. It's not just you and God. It's not just Jesus and you. It's not just those you tend to focus on when you're praying. Lord, help. Lord, help me. Amen. We have to not only look to others, and not just in word. Prayer is important and it's powerful. It's probably the most powerful thing you can do. However, there are many ways that we're called to invest in the lives of others. That's why this morning, as we talk about the purpose of others, we called this RIP, Reinvest in People. I thought it was important too, the way that God sort of presented this to me as it was coming together, because I think for most of us, probably none of us looks in the mirror and says, you are just, what good are you? You don't love people, you don't invest in their lives at all, and yet probably many people around us, if not everyone around us, feels a shortage of support, of love, of being fully known by those who we call friends and that should know us, our church family. Many times we would, maybe even a gathering like we're about to have, where there will be food and you'll probably hear people laughing and people will be talking, and there will be somebody in that room that probably for a moment feels completely alone in that room. In the house of God, after worship, with Jesus invited, all of us doing something we aren't calling socializing, we'll probably call it fellowship, and yet somehow somebody in there will manage to feel completely alone, even if it's just for a moment. And if not today, another gathering just like it. And probably most of us in this room right now are thinking, yeah, that's me. And so when we look at this idea of investing in the lives of others around us so that they might find their purpose, so that they might find their path to Jesus, or so that they might actually just recognize what that path is supposed to contain, let's for a moment consider the idea that that investment is not a one-time act. Let's consider that it wasn't one season. Reinvest in people. It's almost like that idea of being filled with the Spirit. You know, there's that baptism moment, but then there's also just this idea of being filled and continually filling. There's this idea between us of an initial investment and a connection and an ongoing investment in the lives of others. Probably you know somebody in your past who made a significant investment in your life, but it was a one-time thing, and you may have forgotten who they are, forgotten their name, you may have even forgotten this significant investment that maybe allowed you to be the person you are today. So if we're going to be one people, there needs to be a continual investment. Most of the people that we will attend their funerals and celebrate their lives and remember them when they get to their RIP moment, it will be because they reinvested continually in us. You'll say phrases like, they were always there for me. They never let me down. I knew I could always count on fill in the blank. That's not a one-time thing. It takes a commitment, which we're short of in our culture right now. But everyone has a purpose. So invest in the purpose of others. Jesus came so people here on earth would be free from sin, be reconnected to God, and have an example for their purpose. Everything he did here was an investment in people. Everything. Most of those God is asking us to serve or to invest in, we have already encountered. There's a lot of them we haven't, and that's an issue, but you already know a lot of people. And not all of them are living victorious lives. Not all of them are. They might all be going to heaven for all I know, but they're probably not celebrating on the way. I think it's Joyce Meyer that says, a lot of people are going to heaven, but there are a lot of miserable people going to heaven. Before those we know rest in peace, let's take a second look and reinvest in people. Amen? Because again, as Jessica put up a moment ago, it's about purpose. I mean, to a large degree, you are likely to find your purpose cannot exist apart from the purpose of somebody else or a people group. Part of your purpose for being, part of Jesus coming so that you could be free, Paul said, be free, but don't use your freedom to basically serve yourselves. Use it to serve one another. It doesn't really come apart. We want this a la carte thing. And Jesus is saying, I set out a banquet table. Sometimes we feel as though we have no purpose. That's when it really comes to, where you really probably notice it, where each of us probably notice it. There are times in our lives, seasons where we think, what am I doing here? If God, Lord, if this is your doing, why did you bother? So we feel like we might have no purpose, or that our life is without purpose, and it is certain to feel that way. When we diminish relationships and when we marginalize the kingdom of God in our lives. Our purpose doesn't exist apart from God, and it doesn't exist apart from others. And so when we recognize that, then we have to recognize, well, then I must have a part in your purpose and your purpose, right? But it's about purpose. So rather than just say to yourself, well, I know everybody has a purpose, I must have to be busy in that. Today, what I'd like us to focus on is this idea of investing. And because a lot of us don't do that, most of America lives paycheck to paycheck. There's not a lot of investment going on financially. And when it is, it's by a very small percentage of people. Let's talk about that a little bit. But first, the point really is to invest in hope. Really, that's where we're missing. That's where people have lost that sense of purpose, is when they realize that they feel like there is no hope. There's no hope that I'll be happy. There's no hope that I'll be secure financially. There's no hope that I will find love. There's no hope that I will have the family that I dreamed of when I was young. There's no hope of what I had at one time, which was all of those things coming back together because I did something in the past and I messed the whole thing up. or my spouse did something and messed the whole thing up. There's a loss of hope that we can invest in others. This graphic that we have up here, when you try to find graphics to put up on a Sunday morning, when you have ideas like invest in people or hope, putting that into something that you can look at, what could it look like? And this is about as close as I could get. And you can see that it's just a hand dropping seeds into somebody else's head, which I guess could mean a lot of things. But recognize that the way that you're going to end up doing the investing that will count the most in the end isn't that you'll show up with this truckload of something and just drop it on somebody and go, congratulations, you're welcome. Remember me later for all I've done for you. It's far more likely that it's a little bit here and a little bit there, and it's continual over time. And it'll be a thought, it'll be an idea, it will be an act of service. Sometimes it'll just be showing up. I can't tell you how many times people have said, I need to, do you do some sort of counseling? I've got, something's going on, can I come in? And we sit down and they go on for a long time. And at the end of whatever amount of time it really is, they say something that sounds like, oh, thank you, you're awesome, this was really good. And I think to myself, I have said literally nothing. Aside from, would you like a bottle of water or something like that. That was about the last time I had said something. Then 45 minutes later, hour later, something like that. Oh, thank you. Because sometimes all somebody needs is to know that somebody else is there. And if you are that somebody else who's always there, stop worrying about your qualifications. Stop worrying about how prepared you might need to be. Just show up. And then after that, show up. And later down the line, show up. And at some point, you'll figure out what you need to show up better. But as long as we stay back here and go, I'm not quite ready. I'm working on that. I'm reading a new book. God is getting me prepared for a new season. As long as we keep doing that, the likelihood is it's really easy to just float in that eddy for continually. So invest in the hope of someone else. John 13:34 and 35 says, this is Jesus speaking, and he says, oddly, after spending years telling his disciples and everyone about love and love one another, he says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. But what we saw him do when he says, as I have loved you, what we see him do is we see him continually show up and continually invest and continually provide hope that those 12 and beyond didn't know existed. And later we'll talk about the idea that honestly, he is our hope, ultimately. And we're called to be able to give a reason for our hope. But many of us look to Jesus and we think, well, that's someday. Maybe when I retire, I can be what looks more like the ministry of Jesus, the more full-time sort of ministry. And that would be true if you needed to prepare the mother load of interactions and just have one time, boom, here, be hopeful. Now, find your purpose. It's completely different when you just have to show up, which sometimes can be a phone call. Nowadays, it could even just be a text or a comment on somebody's post. I recognize doesn't have the same value, but when somebody is out there and they're just feeling disconnected and feel like no one's hearing them, you'd be surprised at the magnitude or the weight that it might carry that somebody just posts. How many times have you seen this on Facebook when somebody will post something and it says something like this, and it usually gets posted because somebody's copied it from somebody else. It says something like this: I'm doing an experiment. I want to see if anybody actually cares and reads my posts. Well, something rebellious rises up in me when I see that. And I think to myself, for crying out loud, I comment and I post and I message you all the time. If you have to honestly do that, knock it off, But that's how we feel sometimes. There's got to be somebody out there who read that and went, yeah, nobody ever responds to me. I'm completely invisible here. And I don't want that. I'm making light of that. But honestly, because I look at that and I just go, that's unnecessary. But enough people have posted it, so half of the room went, yeah, I've seen that. I don't think they probably thought it was unnecessary. So recognize the amount of weight of just a blip, just showing up, just a text, just a moment, just a lunch, just a get-together a few times a year, being there for strategic moments. Because you know how some people are as well. Some of us will say, you know what, you're never there for me. What are you talking about? We see each other 5 times a week or something like that. Well, you weren't there on my birthday. You weren't there on, some people have a value on certain windows of time. And it doesn't always line up with our schedule. But that's what people are going to remember. That's when they're going to feel like we actually cared. So Jesus is saying you have to be there continually. You have to love them like I've loved you. Not just in the thoughts that I've given you to think about and redefined love for you, but in a very communal sort of way where we do it together. Before entering full-time ministry, and I've shared this with you guys before, but it just seems so appropriate today. I was a stockbroker, so that would have been 11 years ago at the most recent, and because a lot of us don't have a great sense of what it means to invest, here's just a handful of basic investment ideas for successful investing that will apply completely to what we're talking about today. The first thing a stockbroker will tell you is you have got to think long-term. It isn't going to help you to show up today, invest mightily for a month, and then just remove yourself from the market. The high likelihood is that you will lose money short-term. But you look over long-term, years, decades, and you see that for the most part you see a gain. The next one would be start sooner rather than later. In investing, time is your friend. When you start sooner, you have more time to outlive some dips and some disappointments and some failures. And you have time for things to, again, build. And when you're talking about relationships, you can go through maybe some seasons where you have conflict and things aren't working out great, or that you don't really know how to help that person. Maybe you have somebody that's close to you and they're saying, I feel so alone and I need and I don't know, and you're just thinking, I don't know what else to do for you. And sometimes you have to wait out seasons like that. So start sooner than later and you have better results. Be consistent. Again, you don't get to just pop in and pop out of the market and see health. It's just, it doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way in relationships either. You have to be consistent. People have to know that they can count on you. Diversify, which is definitely an investing term, but it just means to not put all your eggs in one basket. So if you are, you just saw that Apple has become the most profitable company in the history of the market, and you say, oh, I love Apple, love my iPhone, and you say, I'm going to go buy some shares of Apple. And then over time you go, oh, I'm going to buy a few more shares. And I'm going to buy. Now, if Apple has a failure, you're going to look at your entire investment portfolio and watch it go down and maybe up. And you say, oh yeah, but Apple, they're booming. They're always going up. Well, yeah, now they are. But you could also make the argument that, they're at a historic high. No company has ever been worth what Apple is worth right now, which means the likelihood is that it won't go higher. It probably will, but it may not. It's probably more likely to go down. If you have, Apple, and then you have, Exxon, and you have it in different areas, then if Apple, has a catastrophic failure, it won't, not that you won't feel it, but you can say, well, that wasn't my only investment. So if you say, well, you know what, I invested just in my family, and now my family hates me for it. I've done, and I've given, and now I don't have anything. And but you say, I have no friends. I don't really ever socialize with my coworkers. I come to church late. I leave early. I don't really have any relationships. Well, then when that one relationship or that very close-knit group has some sort of conflict, which it will at some point, family or school or home, whatever, there may be seasons where you have to back off from that relationship. And you're going to feel completely abandoned if you haven't invested yourself in other relationships. You can't just show up someplace and they go, oh, wow, you've never come to lunch with us. I mean, it'll work, but people are going to wonder what you're doing there for a while. Might be worth it to start investing there, but you got to start somewhere. So you've got to diversify. Also, remember that certain relationships can't be everything for you. Your spouse can't be everything for you. Your oldest group of friends can't be everything for you. You've got to have new friends. Your friends that are just at school, for those of you who are still in school, there's going to be a time when you're not in school anymore, and they're going to go different directions. And those may not all last. The ones that exist simply because you're at a job, when you move on to another job or somebody there moves on to another job, they may not be as tight as you believe them to be. Same may be true of church. And a lot of you know people who used to go to this church. Maybe your relationship isn't as tight as it used to be with them now that they don't. So diversify. And remember that what you have in the end, I wrote here, is all that matters, is what really matters. Because in investing, if you start out with an amount, you're going to get really disappointed that that's all you're ever going to have. The point is that you have hope that there will be more later. Also, along the way, recognize you're going to have ups and downs. What matters is what you have in the end. The same is still true for relationships. Don't interpret that to mean you can do whatever you want now, because all that really matters is how it ends up. What I'm saying there is, when you are investing in the lives of others, recognize that they will disappoint you. And some of them will abandon you, and some of them will hate you or dislike you for what maybe God has asked you to be for them in their lives. But it won't last. The likelihood is that it won't turn out that way. In the end, it is likely to still work. So just a handful of ideas as we go forward here talking about the idea of investing in people. Times are tough right now, and people want answers. And the answers they're really looking for is hope. Where's my hope? Where's my purpose? How do I fit in? How is this ever going to work out for me? And to some degree, they and we are upset because we've invested, but we've invested in really, honestly, the treasures of this world. We've probably spent too much time on our jobs and on the things that we can't take with us. And then when those, when we have what we had in 2008 and things take a significant downturn as a society economically, you say, oh my gosh, I don't have anything, or I lost so much. Well, don't do all your investing there. We can say, oh, but I just need for this time period to really focus on my job. Well, the way that you earn that job is probably the way you're going to have to keep that job. So maintain boundaries so that you can actually invest in what really matters and what will always matter, which is others. Where will hope come from? So, as I said earlier, 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter says, in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. The reason for the hope is that Jesus is Lord. That's what he says there. In your hearts, be sure that Christ is set aside as Lord. And then you're always prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. Because ultimately, that is where the hope comes from. When you're going to invest in somebody else, you can't just show up and say, you know what I like to do? Well, I appreciate what you like to do, but it may not be what I like to do. And if you didn't start with God in the first place, what you're telling me is either going to be short-lived, undervalued, or maybe I won't care at all. Right? That's why it has to start with God. We have to set him aside as Lord. We have to say, Lord, where do you want me to go? Who do you want me to, be in relationship with ultimately? And when I'm there, how is that supposed to work, Lord? okay, Lord, I did what you said, and now they're not returning my messages. Now what am I supposed to do? This is your fault in the first place. You started this. But if we go off on our own, then we're always looking back to him. Hey, now that I've got myself into this, could you tell me what to do? Could you get me out of this? Could you fix this? I totally contaminated this relationship. Could you fix it now? You have to start with him. Matthew 6:19 says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But how much of that are we doing? I mean, cars, boats, houses, money, video games, gadgets, home electronics, instruments, fishing, hunting, camping, books, movies, all that stuff stays here. I know we think that our favorite thing gets to go, even though we'll tell everybody else, you can't take it with you, But we say that our favorite thing will get to go. And you know what? Some of those activities, maybe you do get to those in heaven. I don't know. But all the stuff you're investing in so you can do that now, that doesn't go with you. Some of that stuff is strategic in that it does build, you can use those as tools to build relationships. But we have to be careful if we're building that for ourselves, and that's where all of our time and our funding is going. Because he says specifically, don't do that. And he continues after that, and he says in verse 20 and 21, store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So if you are somebody who makes a practice and builds a lifestyle of saying, you know what, I am always interested in others, and I'm always wondering how I can maybe be a part of helping them find God's purpose, or just being part of that purpose, or letting them do what God created them to do with me involved. And sometimes you just have to receive, and that's what somebody else needs. But if your heart is for people, not necessarily for hunting and fishing, but for that you can do it with people. Not necessarily that you need a new boat or an RV, but because that's going to bring you together with people. Then that's where your heart is going to be. And that's why we have to manage that. Not let our hearts be drawn toward the stuff, but make sure that our hearts are with those people. Because if we're investing there, that's where our heart is going to be. So if we're investing apart from people, our heart is always pointing away from people. And in the end, we're probably not going to be happy with how our investments turned out. Storing up treasures is investing. But what treasure is Jesus referring to? The only things that we can take with us into heaven are relationships and experiences, memories, and the only truly memorable experiences and memories that we probably happened in relationships. So again, if we're focused on relationships, those have to come with us when we go. And we talk a lot maybe about, when we talk about afterlife and that sort of idea, we talk about what you can't take with you. But what about all the things you can't leave behind? There are things that you have to take with you into eternity. You don't get to leave behind. I mean, if God is testing us here and that testing produces character, and we are looking to Him this whole time, and this is how we know who we are, and we will even say it, that those things are spiritual things, then when that spirit goes on from here, it gets to take with it the bullying you experienced when you were a child. It takes with you the harsh words that were spoken with you to you as a young adult, as an adult. You take with you the disappointments of unrealized dreams throughout your lifetime. So what about you participating in those items for somebody else? Because remember, we're talking about investing in others. So if you are the one that isn't there, and providing that disappointment, if you are the one who said those harsh words, if you are the one providing those negative memories, and maybe even something we would call abuse, recognize that you haven't met, C.S. Lewis said, you've never met a mere mortal. Everybody takes all of that with you. We all take that with us when we go. The good news is that if you are a person who says, I am always looking for the best in somebody else, and I let them know that, and I show up when they need me, and I invest in their lives, and I tell them, and I intend to be a nurturing person who says things and does things that are a benefit to someone else, they take that with them. They cannot leave it behind. They could forget it, but it goes with us. That's the investment. That's the treasure that matters. And the good news is, most of that return, you get that here. You get to have the benefit of what you pour into somebody else many times, sometimes not, but many times, immediately. You probably know people who, if you will just smile and encourage somebody, your whole day is different with them. You get that return immediately sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't end. You always get a benefit immediately from the way that you treat somebody else. Sometimes it takes a bit for your investment to show its return, but you get all of it probably here, and then you still take it with you, and it's the only thing you can't leave behind. Everyone here is going somewhere forever. And everyone outside of here is going somewhere forever. And they're going to take along the baggage they've gathered here. We take two kinds of baggage sort of with us. We have what we kind of call baggage here, that excess stuff. Oh boy, you sure come with a lot of baggage. We say to somebody who has a lot of issues from their past or their life. But when we come home from a vacation, like the Kleins, if you've brought something back deliberately, we don't normally call that baggage. We call those souvenirs. So you can be part of somebody's baggage going to heaven, or you can be a souvenir. You can provide them something that they don't want to let go. You can bring them that spoon with the little logo on the top of it that they simply won't let go of, regardless of how unreasonable it is to keep holding on to it. I just say that because when else do you need a spoon with, Yosemite on the top of it? But apparently we do. My mom I don't know, Mom, she's collected spoons probably for most of my life. I never really understood it. But the point being that there are things that you can do, there are investments that you can make, and you don't get to know right now which one of them is going to be that thing that they remember and they think, that was the most awesome thing. You were there when you provided, when everyone else was you. You know what I'm saying? And they will remember that and take that with them. And we just have to be sure that to the best of our abilities, we're doing what we can reasonably to not be those things that they're taking with them when they're thinking, I can't believe you. How come you never, If we're focused on investing in the lives of others, we can take something of value with us. Relationships and loving others. Invest there and you will care. If you're putting your time and your energy toward another person or a group of people, eventually you will care about them, whether you do now or not. If you're like, I don't really care that much, you know what? I tell you what, you spend enough time with somebody, either A, you'll learn enough about them that you will feel loving toward them, or you will just be so invested in them, you'll say, you know what, after all I've done and the time I've spent, no, we are going to have a relationship. You will make a decision to love and be in relationship with that person because of your relationship, if not because of the way that they've behaved during the investment time. Sometimes just simple as just be the kindest person in the room. sometimes that doesn't even take a whole lot of work, honestly. You go into, I mean, some of you probably have had workplaces that you go into and you go, you know what, it's not difficult to be the kindest person in my workplace. You know, you walk in, everybody's swearing, nobody speaks to each other except to demand something of somebody else, or if they want to gossip about somebody that's not there at the moment, then they'll find people to talk to. And all you really have to do is go in and find that peace and that joy that we're supposed to have deliberately, spiritually deposited in us with the Holy Spirit, and just let that out. Be the kindest person in the room. Show kindness to the least of whoever you're encountering. You know, because sometimes you're going to say, you know what, I invest in my friends and they don't seem to care all that much. Well, you know what, your friends aren't the only people on the planet. Sometimes it is trying to find somebody. And I'm not even saying that because some of us are hearing that and going, well, you know what, I don't want to go to, I don't know, Africa or, you know, some third world country where I have to live and there's going to be a dirt floor and I'll never see a Starbucks ever again or something like that. And you're thinking, that sounds horrible. But, you know, serving and loving, you know, what God might highlight to you as somebody who's feeling like the least of these at that moment doesn't mean you have to be their best friend forever. Sometimes for you, it just means recognizing that you still have something to give to somebody else. Because some of us think, well, I'd be somebody's friend. I'd invest in somebody else's life. I don't really have anything. No one ever values anything in me, so I don't really have anything to give somebody else. But again, let me just tell you, you just pour out your cup. You don't have to know everything about a subject. You don't have to be the best at anything. But you've been given something, and all you have to do is give that away to somebody else, whether it's meager or a bunch, whether you poured it out last week and you feel like you haven't been refilled yet, you just pour out what you have at any given moment. And you know what? A lot of us are thinking, this sounds difficult, but you're already investing somewhere. You have 24 hours in the day. You probably already come in contact with piles of people on any given day, or at least during every week. You're already investing. Just do it with some intent and with, again, being connected. Jesus is Lord first, and then those relationships. You have to identify exactly where that investment going and maybe reinvest in this new focus. Because remember, the first thing I said here 5 years ago was the church doesn't exist for you. You are the church, and you exist for the world. You are the face of the organization. Some people, the only reason they know that this Radiant Church is here is because they saw you someday. And so the only thing they know is you. They don't know Jesus. They don't know me. They don't know anybody in this room but you. And so your face, your words, your actions, you are Radiant Church. You are Jesus. You are the Bible to them. You're the face, and recognize the great privilege that is and the responsibility that can be. Another quote that's important for a day like this is Dr. Phil. You can't get away from Dr. Phil, can you? You know, he said some pretty sharp things, honestly. And one of them is, every relationship needs a hero. There will always be a time in every relationship you have where you feel like, I have done all of the investing in this relationship. If I cut off my investment, this relationship will die immediately. I am keeping it afloat. And yet, if Jesus is Lord and he's saying, this is where I placed you, don't let them go, then you've got to find the strength. That's why that word hero really makes a difference there. I don't care what hero you've seen a movie about, they all have a moment in that movie. Even Superman, who is kind of like the least of these superheroes right now because he's invincible, and that's not interesting in today's culture. They're like, he's kind of perfect. We don't like perfect right now. We want psychological problems, and we want moral failures, and we want him to feel somewhat vulnerable. Well, you know what? There are even those movies where Superman even has to dig deep and figure out, why am I doing this, and why would I bother, and where should this strength and calling go? At some point in your relationships, you're going to have to dig deep, figure out why you're there, why you're doing what you're doing. Lord, why are you making me do this? And find the strength to do the right thing in the relationship, whether you get credit for it or whether they're helping you or not. And usually heroes will say something like this: you know what? I only did what anyone else would do. But when you look at relationships around you, that's just simply not true. Are we just doing what anyone else would do? Are we doing those things? Are we ready to rescue others by snatching them from the flames? Like we see in Jude 1:23. For those of you who are thinking, you know what, I have pretty good relationships. I'm a people person. My life is nothing if not investment in others, and people credit you for it, and you recognize a spiritual gifting for it. You may even have a certificate for it. Rather than make it sound like I want to rain on your parade, let me just say for a moment how important this idea is. You know, some around us right now, you could look at the news, you can look at people's Facebook, you can look at your relationships and recognize that some have lost jobs, homes. We know people who have lost family members, but they're joyful. But we also know others who may have lost comparably little, and they're miserable. So how do we know whether anyone we come in contact with is hopeless enough that we would feel confident sharing our lives or the gospel with them? How about just starting here? What causes more deaths globally every year? Homicide, suicide, or war? The World Health Organization says one suicide is attempted every 3 seconds. That's 2,400 just during the time most of us will have been here today. Over 28,000 a day. 1 million people a year commit suicide, but the estimate is that 10 to 25 times that many attempt it every year. How miserable do you have to be? And the question is answered for us right there. And recognize that if right now we wanted to be super generous and say 30% of the people who are extended an invitation to find Jesus as their Savior and heaven as their home, 30% maybe would accept that. Look in the church in the declining numbers and recognize how many are in there right now. It's probably about the same number, maybe 30%. That means that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of that every 3-second number, when they die, go into eternity without God. So if you're saying, well, maybe I don't find it quite as important to be involved in the lives of others or be that social butterfly or be investing in the lives of others, recognize that eternity is on the line. You've never met a mere mortal. Everyone's going someplace. And our call is to invest in all that you can't leave behind. Must recognize what we're choosing and what we're choosing to ignore. Every 30 seconds, someone is so discouraged and hopeless, they'll consider giving up completely on the purposes for which they were created. So invest in people, and you'll discover where God is doing his most passionate work. Agreed? All right.